Hey guys, for today's video I'm going to be working on this Champion generator. I found this at the dump, so I really don't know anything about it. I don't know why they threw it away or what's wrong with it, but just a quick look at it, I can tell there's definitely 3 or 4 things that look to be problems with it that'll need to be fixed. So we'll find out what's wrong with this thing and if it'll run and make power. I'll go ahead and go around this thing and show you just a few of the things that I found already just looking it over that are going to need to be addressed. Okay guys, problem number 1 I found is this toggle switch somebody has added. I believe they were trying to use it as a battery disconnect switch, which it's not meant to do that. So that'll have to be redone. And I went ahead and did a continuity test across it, and the switch is bad anyway, so it wasn't going to work. Second thing, the battery hold down strap is missing. They've got some bungee cord on here. Not too big of a deal, but I'll get the right one and put on there if I can get it running. Third thing I've noticed is the recoil start has zip ties holding it on. Not really sure what that was all about, but that'll have to be fixed. Next thing wrong with it, the fuel line coming from the fuel tank to the carburetor is broke off. Fifth thing wrong with this, the choke lever on the carburetor is supposed to have some type of spring for a detent to keep it from moving around, and it's just loose. So if that thing ran, the choke would vibrate closed and kill it, and I'm sure that carburetor is probably trashed. So I'll have to take that off and take it all apart. Either maybe fix it, or I might just put a new one on there if they're cheap enough. See how that goes. And the next and sixth thing I've found wrong with this is this muffler. The heat shield's missing off of it, and somebody attempted to weld an exhaust adapter on there, I'm guessing to put a hose on it so they can run it inside of a building. Look at that. That's got to go. Looking inside the fuel tank on this, I'm surprised there's no rust, but you can clearly see that there is definitely water in the gas. All those little bubbles are water droplets. That's going to have to come out and be flushed. Really, guys? Here's another problem I stumbled across. The terminal that they used to go to the starter solenoid is way too big. We'll correct that. Here's the toggle switch they had on here being used as a battery disconnect. As you can see, this wire here has gotten so hot it's melted. Did a continuity test on this and the switch is bad. And so we're going to eliminate that and put the wiring back the way that it should go, because there shouldn't be a need for a battery disconnect switch. Here's the gas I drained out of it. If you look, you can see there's a pretty good amount of water in the bottom of it. I'm going to pull the drain plug on the float bowl of this carburetor, see what we get out of here. Actually a lot better looking than I was expecting, but it does smell pretty old. Wow, I'm actually surprised it's that clean. It's a lot better than I thought it would look. This blower housing is missing one of the bolts, but it still has 3 left in it. Alright, this recoil has only got 1 bolt in it, and it's got these zip ties all around it. So, I'll figure out what's up with that. That does not look like that's the original bolt. Looks like 2 of the bolt holes are stripped out on this. So I may have to drill and tap, put some bigger bolts in it. I've got this blower housing and this recoil start all cleaned up, and I had to retap the holes for the recoil start, and I'm going to have to get a little bit creative because I went up to next size up, but because this is kind of like a tapered recess, if you were to run the head of the bolt all the way down, you can't get a socket on it. So I'm going to use some spacers to keep the head up off the bottom of it, and I think that should work just fine. I've got some of these spacers. If I remember right, I believe these are spacers for the fuel pump drive out of a 671 blower. But if I put that there, then I can put the bolt in it, tighten it down. Should hold the recoil start on perfectly fine. Before I go any further cleaning this carburetor, it has one pretty good problem that needs to be addressed, or this carburetor is pretty much useless. The choke on this, there's supposed to be some kind of spring to keep the choke either closed or open whenever you flip it either way, and it appears, I don't know if there's part of it missing or what, but I'm gonna have to figure out something, because if this choke can just rattle closed while it's running, this carburetor is pretty much useless then. So instead of buying another new one, I'm gonna see if I can maybe cut a piece of rubber hose to fit over this, to where it'll give this a lot more resistance, to where it might be kind of hard to turn, but it won't vibrate back and forth while it's running. It's worth a try. If it don't work, a new carburetor is only 27 bucks. So I'll try this first. If it works, great. If not, no big loss. Got a small piece of vacuum hose. I'm going to try to fit it over this shoulder bolt that this choke lever pivots on. And I may have to drill the lever out a little bit, but maybe if I can drill it to the right size, it might fit on there like a good snug fit. Alright guys, I think I might actually have that working. So I put that rubber hose in between this screw and this lever as like an insulator or spacer, and it actually is kind of hard to turn. It provides just enough resistance to where whenever the engine's running, the vibrations won't let the choke move unless you physically turn it. So I think that'll work. Save me 27 bucks on a new carburetor. Got everything all clean underneath this blower housing. I got the carburetor all cleaned up and ready to go. Just got to put the air box on now. Got the air box all back on. Now it's time to look at the electrical system. So I've been trying to hook up a jump box to this to see if I can get it to crank over. And I hooked it up, and I can't get it to crank or do anything. That white wire you see sticking up there is supposed to go to the big terminal on the starter solenoid, and I hooked it up with the jump box and nothing's happening. I did look at a wiring diagram and I see that there's supposed to be a 10 amp fuse, so I'm guessing it's probably in there with that starter switch back in that panel. So I'm going to take this panel off and see if I can figure out what's going on in there, why the electric isn't making its way to the starter. I also ordered what is supposed to be this part here, since this is cracked, and on their website it's only like $11.47, but it doesn't show a picture of it. So I thought, you know what, it's only 11 bucks, it's worth trying to order it, see if it's the right one or not. If it is, that'll be cool. Here's the old battery cables I took off. I figure I'll go ahead and just put some new ones on there. So I've got these wires that I saved from a winch that I got. So I'm going to cut those up and use those for new battery cables. Got the battery cables cut and installed. I still need to get a new battery, but at least they're on there and ready to go. Looks like somebody bent the front and the side down on this battery tray. Probably, I'm assuming, so they could fit a lawnmower battery on there. And I'm about to bend that all back up the way it goes, because I plan on putting another battery like this on it. Alright guys, so I've been working on trying to figure out why this engine won't crank over with the electric starter. And I've been busting my brain for like a week trying to figure this out. It has had me stumped, and I finally think I figured it out. So when I first got it, I thought, well, I want to test this starter and see if it cranks over, you know. So what I did was I unplugged the starter solenoid wire, and with using a jump box, if you hook it to a positive lead, it'll crank over. So I thought, okay, you know, starter solenoid is good, the starter's good, but it's obviously not getting 12 volts down to it when you push the starter button up here on the panel. So, you know, I checked that, and of course it was not getting 12 volts down there to it, you know, on a positive wire. And I took the panel apart and was just looking at it, and I just was trying to figure out how it was wired. And I looked up a wiring diagram online, and it was showing basically everything going to that switch was all ground wires. And I was trying to figure out, how the heck are you going to send 12 volts down to this starter relay if all the wires going to the start and run switch are basically ground, you know, connecting ground wires. And it was busting my brain, and I finally realized that I'm like, it's wired exactly the way the wiring diagram shows, so it's not anything in the panel that's wrong, and the switch tested good. And I finally realized, I'm like, it's got to be something funky with this starter relay. And I noticed that it's got this different colored connector on there. And I thought, well, that's kind of suspicious, because all the rest of the connectors on this machine are pretty much got like a clear rubbery plastic on them, except for that one. And I thought, well, that maybe they'd put that on there from the factory, but it kind of looks like maybe somebody crimped that on there, you know. And I thought, well, maybe there's supposed to be something different with this relay. So I actually finally realized that this is a switched ground. It sends a ground, it connects it to ground whenever you push the start switch. But if you send a ground wire to this, nothing happens. So I thought, maybe somehow this has the wrong starter solenoid on it. So I went and I looked up the parts for this machine, this model number, and I looked up the starter relay for it, and it's supposed to have more wires than this. It's supposed to have, instead of one coming out of it like this, there's supposed to be two, and one of them goes around and connects to one of the positive posts, and then the other one is just a plug-in like this. So I think what it's supposed to be is it's actually supposed to be a switched ground, and somebody at some point has put the wrong starter solenoid on here that was meant for a different application that sent 12 volts positive down to it instead of a ground. And they put it on here, and then they tried to crimp, they probably cut this wire off the old relay, because this style comes with just a spade terminal. So they added this and cut the wire off the old relay to be able to plug it in, and then it wouldn't crank over. So they've probably been pull starting this sucker for who knows how long, because when I first got this thing, it was covered in dirt and dust, and this looked like it had been on there for quite some time. It didn't look brand new. So that's kind of why I overlooked it. But so anyway, long story short, I'm going to order the correct starter solenoid and put on there, and I believe that'll solve the problem. Since I'm waiting on parts, I figure I'll move along to the feet on this. You can see here the foot is pretty bent up, and those rubber feet have been worn down at angles, so I'll have to get some new ones of those. Also, the bracket that goes across the frame, it's kind of twisted. This was pretty under designed, because it flexes pretty easily whenever you kind of push on the generator when it's sitting on the ground. So I think I'll add a couple of braces to strengthen this up. So you can see here this cross member on the frame is bent, so it shouldn't take much. I'm going to grab a big crescent wrench and stick on it, and it should twist back straight pretty easily. That's not perfect, but it's much better. I've got that bracket straightened out about as best I can. It did break a spot weld on this gusset, so I'll have to weld that back up. But what I've come up with is, I think I'm going to cut off part of this and weld it on standing up in the middle to brace it, to keep this from bending up again. And about right here on the cross member is another bolt where the ground wire connects to the frame. So I think what I'll do is I'll just make this L piece on the end here line up with that bolt hole, and then I'll MIG weld it onto the bracket here. That should keep that from bending up. And then my plan is to keep it from being able to, you know, rock like this real easy. Is I'm going to take a piece of rebar and weld it from here up to the other cross member on the other side of the generator. And that should give this thing a lot more strength, in theory. Okay guys, here's what I've come up with to keep this bracket from flexing. So I took a piece of rebar and cut it to length and bent it to fit both ends, and I'm just going to drill it and bolt it in place. I could weld it, but I figure probably better if it can be unbolted in the future for some other reason. So I'll go ahead and drill that and bolt that on there like that. I've got this back together now. I've got 2 extra braces on here. That's more than it had from the factory, so should be a lot more stable now. And just going to run these rubber pads for now until I make sure this thing runs right and makes power. Then whenever I find that out, then I might order some new ones. I noticed one of the wheels was leaning pretty hard, so I figured this axle was bent, and it is. So I'm going to stick it in the vise and see if I can just tweak it a little bit. So this plastic electrical box came in today. It is actually the correct one. I'm surprised, and I can't believe it was only $11. I would say Champion actually has really good prices on their replacement parts. You know, I would have expected a place to charge 50, 60 bucks for something like this, even though it's just a little piece of plastic. But anyway, the only difference is it doesn't have the decals on there telling you how many watts it produces. But I don't know, maybe if I like the generator and it runs good enough, maybe I'll have some aftermarket one made or something and put on it. But this is probably going to be a very painful replacement, because all the wiring goes through that round hole on the right, and then that little square one you see in there on the curved part. All that has to be undone and fished through there. And I know 2 of the wires for the DC circuit coming out of the generator go through both holes and have plugs, and I'm gonna have to see if them plugs will fit through the holes or not. I don't know, we'll find out. But here we go. So first thing here, I'll show you what all has to be undone to replace this. All of this wiring harness here goes down to the engine, and that's all pretty self-explanatory. Color-coded wires, they just, male and female round plugs, they just snap together. So I should be able to just unplug all of them, and I did take pictures just to make sure of where each one goes, in case in case I get confused later. The more difficult part is going to be these 2 brown ones here. I know that there's a plug down in the generator for those, but they also come over and go to this plug on this rectifier down in here, and then go back over to the engine. So I don't know if the plug on the generator side is going to be able to fit through this hole or not, so we're going to find that out. Hopefully it does. Got this harness undone from the engine, so it's good to go. Now I just got to go over and focus on the generator. It doesn't look too difficult in the generator to pop this stuff apart. You got this plug here, these neutral and ground wires here that are bonded together. Then each leg of the generator has this red wire and this black wire. I got to take both of those off. Got all these wires unhooked from the generator, so should be good to pull them on through. I've got this rubber deal here with some tape on it. I have to figure out how that comes off. I'm going to go ahead and pull this whole panel off and take it over to the workbench where it'll be a lot easier to work on. So this looks like it's going to be the hardest part of this whole swap, is either getting these wires all back through this so that I can get it off here and put it on the other one, which means that these will have to be popped out of this square plug. But I don't think that's going to work out very well. So I'm kind of thinking maybe, if I'm lucky, I can squish this grommet through the plastic and feed this whole thing through and just kind of, work this way through the hole, and maybe I can get this stuff all worked through there. I'm going to try that first before I rip all that apart. There's no pulling the wires out through from the backside, because some of these wires go into connectors with multiple wires crimped together in one connector, and to take all that stuff apart would just be a big nightmare. So I think I'm going to try to squeeze this through the hole first. I'll give it a go, let you know how it goes. No way. It went that easy. Now the other wiring harness here should go through pretty easy. There it is. I gotta say that went a lot smoother than I thought it would go. But you know what? I'll take a win when I can get one. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. That was pretty easy, actually. I've got all the wires hooked back up in this generator, and the only thing that I had to do different was where the neutral and the ground wire hooked up was originally right here, and I noticed when I pulled the bolt out of it, a bunch of shavings fell out on this plastic bus bar. And when I went to put the wires back on there, the bolt just spun and spun and spun. Now, I didn't strip it out. I guess the factory over-torqued it, but there was another hole here that was already threaded, so I just moved them over there, bolted it right up, should be good to go. Shouldn't make any difference. So, should be able to put the cover back on this and then move on to the wires on the engine. Got all the engine wiring plugged back up and secured. Just got to wait for those two wires for the new starter solenoid to come in. then I'll kind of zip tie them up a little better. Got the fuel tank mounted back on here. Got it all nice and cleaned out. There was a bunch of debris floating around in there, and it kept clogging up the fuel shutoff valve. Now, the only filtration that this thing had on the fuel system from the factory was basically just this little strainer that you can pull out. But I don't really think that's good enough. So I've went ahead and added an actual fuel filter in line, and should work. This is a reinforced fuel line, so it shouldn't kink. So we'll see how it goes. But I do think it's a lot better to have a fuel filter in line. Okay guys, I think it's time to test run this thing. I still haven't got the starter solenoid or the battery strap in yet, but I can test run it nonetheless. So I'm just going to jumper wire from the battery to that starter solenoid just to start it for now till the new one comes in. But I got the breaker turned off, so I'm going to get it. If it starts up and runs, I'll flip the breaker on, see if that light turns on, and then if it does, I'll I got a blower heater here that's like 1320 watts. I'll turn that on if it runs and see how it does, and go from there. Wow, that thing smoked a lot, but it did clear up after a few minutes. So I'm thinking, could just be for me tipping it up. I did drain the oil out, but it could have been a little bit left in there. Or it could have been that this thing was rolled over with whenever they unloaded it at the dump, and it did have oil in it, so it could have gotten, you know, in the cylinder and stuff, got in the exhaust. So we'll let it sit a bit, clear out the garage here, so I can breathe again, and we'll start it up again and see if it smokes again. So I've started this thing a few different times, and I've noticed that if it sits for 5 or 6 hours or overnight, next time you go to start it, it smokes really bad. But it does clear up after that. So I'm thinking it's probably valve guide seals. So I'm going to start it up and show you that it smokes here and how bad it is. Then see if it clears up. Then I've ordered some valve guide seals for this, and I'm going to change them out and see if that takes care of the issue. While I got this up on the lift, I'm going to go ahead and swap out this starter solenoid, show you the difference between the two. So here's the difference between the solenoid that was on there and the one that's supposed to be on there. The one that was just had this single terminal, and the one that's supposed to be on here has two wires coming out of there. One's a positive and one's a negative. Well guys, we got bad news. Seems that the cylinder must be worn out and piston rings, so it's going to need a rebuild. And I checked Champion's website, and the whole engine block cylinder is only $42 plus shipping. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try to order a new engine block and piston and rings, some bearings and seals and whatnot. I'm going to pull this motor off of here and freshen it up, see if we can get this thing to stop using oil, because I think right now it's just using too much oil. Even though the smoke clears up after a few minutes, it uses too much oil. I think it would end up being a hassle trying to use it, where you got to stop every so often and fill it back up with oil. Not very user friendly. So I'm going to go ahead and tear this thing apart and do an engine rebuild on it. So I'm going to end this video here for now, and then I'm going to make another one doing the engine rebuild.